The dusty streets of Alta, California had never seen a woman stumble into town looking quite as desperate as Rebecca Langley did on that scorching afternoon in July of 1883. Her dress torn at the hem, and her face streaked with dirt and tears that carved clean lines down her cheeks. She had been traveling with a wagon train heading toward Sacramento when bandits struck in the night, taking everything of value and scattering the survivors like seeds in the wind. Rebecca had walked for 2 days straight, her water gone, her hope fading with each step through the unforgiving Sierra Nevada foothills. The small mining town of Alta appeared like a mirage at first, shimmering in the heat, but as she drew closer, the buildings solidified into reality. Her legs gave out just as she reached the wooden sidewalk outside the general store, and she collapsed against a post, her vision swimming. Preston Ellis had been loading supplies onto his horse when he heard the commotion. He turned to see a young woman, probably no more than 20 years old, trying desperately to pull herself upright. Her honey-colored hair had fallen loose from its pins, and her green eyes held a wild, frightened look that reminded him of a trapped animal. Without hesitation, he dropped the sack of flour he had been holding and rushed to her side. "Madam, are you hurt?" His voice was low and steady, the kind of voice that had calmed many a spooked horse over his 26 years. Rebecca looked up at him, taking in his sun-weathered face, the concern in his blue eyes and the dust that covered his worn work clothes. "Water," she managed to croak out, her throat raw and parched. Preston immediately pulled his canteen from his belt and uncorked it, holding it to her lips with gentle care. She drank deeply, some of the water spilling down her chin in her eagerness. When she finally pulled back, gasping, her eyes met his with profound gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "I thought I might die out there." "What happened?" Preston asked, helping her to sit more comfortably against the post. A small crowd had begun to gather, curious faces peering at the stranger. Rebecca told him everything in a halting voice, about the attack, the terror, the long walk through the wilderness. As she spoke, Preston felt anger rise in his chest at the thought of men who would prey on innocent travelers. But more than anger, he felt an overwhelming need to help this woman, to see her safe and cared for. "You need a doctor and a proper meal," he said firmly. "Can you stand?" With his help, Rebecca managed to get to her feet, though she swayed unsteadily. Preston kept one hand on her elbow, supporting her weight. The crowd had dispersed somewhat, though several townspeople still watched with interest. Alta was a small town, and strangers were always a source of gossip. "I do not have any money," Rebecca said, her voice breaking with shame. "They took everything. I cannot pay for a doctor or food or lodging. I do not even know how I will survive." Preston reached into his pocket and pulled out a single silver dollar. It was all the money he had left after buying supplies. His ranch was struggling, had been struggling for months, and this dollar was supposed to buy him tobacco and a drink at the saloon, small comforts to get him through another week of hard work and worry. But looking at Rebecca's desperate face, he did not hesitate. He pressed the coin into her palm. "Take it," he said. "Get yourself a room at the boarding house and a hot meal." Rebecca stared at the dollar in her hand, then looked up at Preston with tears welling in her eyes. She could see from his worn boots and patched shirt that he was not a wealthy man. The calluses on his hands spoke of hard labor, and the lines around his eyes told of worry and struggle. This was his last dollar, she realized, and he was giving it to a complete stranger. "I cannot take this," she said, trying to push the coin back into his hand. "You need this money. Your kindness is worth more than gold, truly, but I cannot accept it when you clearly need it yourself." Preston closed her fingers around the dollar and stepped back. "My kindness is not worth anything if I do not act on it," he said simply. You need help and I can give it. That is enough reason." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Rebecca felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon heat. She had never met anyone quite like this cowboy, who would give away his last dollar to a stranger without expecting anything in return. "At least tell me your name," she said, "so I know who to repay when I am back on my feet." "Preston Ellis," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "I run a small ranch about 5 miles outside town. Well, I try to run it anyway. Times have been hard." "Rebecca Langley," she replied, managing a small smile despite her exhaustion. "And I promise you, Preston Ellis, I will repay this kindness somehow. I do not know how yet, but I will find a way." Preston felt something catch in his throat as she smiled at him. She was beautiful, even covered in dust and clearly exhausted. But more than that, there was a strength in her eyes, a determination that spoke of character. He found himself wanting to know more about her, to hear her story, to see that smile again. "For now, just focus on getting some rest," he said. "The boarding house is just down the street. Mrs. Patterson runs it. Tell her I sent you and she will treat you right." Rebecca nodded, clutching the dollar like a lifeline. "Will I see you again?" The question surprised them both. Rebecca had not meant to sound so hopeful, and Preston had not expected his heart to leap at her words. He cleared his throat, suddenly feeling awkward. "I come into town every week for supplies," he said, "usually on Saturdays." "Then I will look for you on Saturday," Rebecca said, and the promise in her voice made Preston's pulse quicken. He watched as she made her way down the street toward the boarding house, her steps unsteady but determined. Only when she disappeared through the door did he turn back to his horse, his mind whirling. He had just given away his last dollar to a woman he had just met, and somehow he did not regret it for a second. The week that followed was the longest of Preston's life. He threw himself into work on the ranch, mending fences, tending to his small herd of cattle, and trying not to think about green eyes and honey-colored hair. But Rebecca filled his thoughts anyway, appearing in his mind as he worked under the hot sun, as he lay in his bed at night staring at the ceiling, as he went about the mundane tasks that made up his days. He wondered if she was all right, if she had found work, if she thought about him at all. The questions plagued him, making him restless and distracted. His horse, an old mare named Dusty, seemed to sense his mood and gave him patient, knowing looks that made him feel foolish. "I am being ridiculous," he told the horse on Friday evening as he brushed her coat. "She is just a woman I helped, that is all." But Dusty snorted as if she disagreed, and Preston had to admit the horse might be right. Rebecca was not just any woman. There had been something in that moment when their eyes met, a connection he could not explain or dismiss. Saturday morning found Preston up before dawn, washing more thoroughly than usual and putting on his best shirt, the blue one that was only a little faded. He told himself he was not dressing up for Rebecca, that he always looked presentable when going to town, but he knew he was lying. He wanted to see her again, wanted it with an intensity that both excited and frightened him. The ride into Alta seemed to take forever, though it was the same 5 miles it had always been. Preston's heart hammered in his chest as he tied Dusty to the hitching post outside the general store. He tried to appear casual as his eyes scanned the street, looking for any sign of Rebecca, looking for someone, Preston. He turned to find Martha Davies, the shopkeeper's wife, watching him with an amused expression. Martha was a kind woman in her 50s who had known Preston since he was a boy. "Just came for supplies," he said, trying to sound nonchalant. "Of course," Martha said, her eyes twinkling. "Though if you are looking for that young woman you helped last week, I saw her heading toward the church about an hour ago. Reverend Taylor has been putting her to work helping with the Sunday preparations." Preston felt his face heat up. Was he that transparent? "I was not looking for anyone in particular," he mumbled. Martha patted his arm knowingly. "Sure you were not, dear. The church is down the street, in case you were wondering." Preston muttered his thanks and tried to walk at a normal pace toward the small white church at the end of town. His palms were sweating, and he felt like a nervous boy rather than a grown man. What was he even going to say to her? Thank goodness he had thought to bring the money he had earned from selling 2 calves earlier in the week. At least he was not completely broke anymore. The church door stood open, and Preston could hear voices inside. He paused at the threshold, suddenly uncertain. Maybe coming here was a mistake. Maybe Rebecca had not meant anything by saying she would look for him. Maybe he was building up something in his mind that was not really there. But then he heard her laugh, clear and bright, and all his doubts evaporated. He stepped inside. The interior of the church was cool and dim after the bright sunlight. Rebecca stood near the altar, arranging wildflowers in a simple vase. She wore a plain cotton dress that Martha Davies must have loaned her, and her hair was pulled back in a neat braid. She looked up as Preston entered, and her face lit up with a smile that made his breath catch. "Preston," she said, and the way she said his name made it sound like music. "You came." "I said I would be in town on Saturday," he replied, moving closer. "How are you? Are you all right?" Rebecca set down the flowers and walked toward him, her hands clasped in front of her. "I am well, thanks to you. Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house has been wonderfully kind. She let me stay even though your dollar only covered one night, and she has been feeding me in exchange for help with cleaning and cooking. Reverend Taylor has also been good to me, letting me help here at the church." "That is good," Preston said, relieved. "I have been worried about you." The admission hung between them, intimate and honest. Rebecca's cheeks colored slightly. "You have been worried about me?" she asked softly. "Every day," Preston said before he could stop himself. "I kept thinking about you out there in the wilderness, alone and scared. I kept hoping you were all right." Rebecca's eyes grew bright with emotion. "I have thought about you too," she admitted. "About your kindness, about the sacrifice you made. I asked around town about you, Preston Ellis. People say you are a good man, honest and hardworking. They also say your ranch has been struggling, and that you have been working yourself to the bone trying to keep it going. Knowing that makes your gift even more precious to me." Preston felt uncomfortable with the praise. "I only did what anyone would do." "No," Rebecca said firmly, stepping closer. "Not anyone. Most people would have walked past me. Some might have offered water, but few would have given their last dollar to a stranger. You did, and I have not forgotten it. I will never forget it." The intensity in her voice made Preston's heart race. They stood close now, close enough that he could see the golden flecks in her green eyes, close enough to catch the faint scent of lavender soap. "I am glad I could help," he said, his voice rough. "And I am glad you are safe. Walk with me." Rebecca asked suddenly, "I have been in this town for a week, but I have barely seen any of it. I would like to see it with you." Preston offered his arm without hesitation, and Rebecca took it, her hand light on his sleeve. They left the church together and walked through Alta's dusty streets, talking about everything and nothing. Rebecca told him about her life before the attack, how she had been traveling from Missouri to meet her aunt in Sacramento, hoping to start fresh after her parents had died from illness the previous winter. Preston told her about his ranch, about the dream he had of building it into something prosperous, about the challenges he faced with drought and cattle prices. The conversation flowed easily between them, natural and comfortable despite their brief acquaintance. They discovered shared values and similar dreams. Both had lost family young and knew what it meant to struggle. Both believed in hard work and honesty. Both had been lonely for longer than they wanted to admit, They walked to the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land. The view stretched out before them, golden hills rolling toward distant mountains, vast and beautiful and untamed. "It is stunning," Rebecca breathed, shading her eyes against the sun. "It is," Preston agreed, but he was looking at her rather than the landscape. Rebecca turned and caught him staring. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them seemed charged with possibility, with the weight of feelings too new and fragile to name but too strong to ignore. "Preston," Rebecca said hesitantly, "I need to tell you something. I have been thinking about what to do next, about where to go. My aunt in Sacramento might not even know I am coming since the wagon train never reached her. I have no money, no way to get there, and honestly, I am not sure I want to go anymore." "What do you mean?" Preston asked, though his heart had begun to beat faster. "I mean that in this past week, I have felt more at home in Alta than I expected to. The people here have been kind. Mrs. Patterson and Reverend Taylor have made me feel welcome. And you," she paused, gathering courage, "you have shown me more genuine kindness than anyone ever has. I find myself not wanting to leave." Preston felt hope surge through him, bright and powerful. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I would like to stay here if I can find work and a way to support myself. I have experience with cooking and sewing, and Mrs. Patterson mentioned that the dressmaker in town needs help. I could build a life here, I think." "You could," Preston said, his mind racing. "Alta is a good town, small but good, and there are opportunities for someone willing to work hard. Like you," Rebecca said with a small smile. "You work harder than anyone from what I have heard. People respect you, Preston." "I do what I have to do," he said. "The ranch was my father's dream before he died. I am just trying to keep it alive." Rebecca's expression softened with understanding. "That is a heavy burden to carry alone." The word "alone" seemed to echo between them. Preston felt something shift, felt the moment balance on a knife's edge. He could let Rebecca walk away, let her build her own life separate from his, or he could take a chance, risk rejection, and speak the truth that had been growing in his heart all week. "It is lonely sometimes," he admitted. "The ranch, I mean. It is just me out there. I work from sunup to sundown, and at the end of the day there is no one to talk to except my horse. I tell myself it is enough, that work is enough, but lately I have been wondering if maybe there could be more to life than just surviving." Rebecca's hand tightened on his arm. "What kind of more?" Preston turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. They were small and soft, though he could feel new calluses forming from her week of work. "I know we just met. I know it is too soon to feel the way I feel, but I cannot help it, Rebecca. This whole week I have been able to think of nothing but you. I want to know everything about you. I want to hear your voice every day. I want to see your smile, to make you laugh, to be the reason you are happy." Does that sound crazy? Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes, but she was smiling. "It sounds exactly how I have been feeling," she whispered. "I thought I was losing my mind. How can you care so much about someone you barely know? But I do, Preston. I care about you. I have from the moment you gave me that $1, the moment you looked at me with such kindness in your eyes." Preston pulled her closer, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I have never believed in fate or destiny, but meeting you feels like something more than chance. Like maybe you were supposed to stumble into Alta. Like maybe I was supposed to be there that day." "Your kindness is worth more than gold," Rebecca said, echoing her words from that first day. "I meant that then, and I mean it now. You are a good man, Preston Ellis, and I would very much like to know you better, to see where this feeling between us might lead." "So would I," Preston said, and then, unable to resist any longer, he leaned down and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and sweet, full of promise and hope. Rebecca's arms came up around his neck, and Preston wrapped his around her waist, holding her close. The world seemed to fade away until there was only the two of them, two lonely souls who had found each other against all odds. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless and smiling. Preston rested his forehead against Rebecca's, not wanting to let her go. "Come out to the ranch," he said impulsively. "Tomorrow, if you are free, I want to show you my home, my life. I want you to see what I am working toward." "I would love that," Rebecca said. "Mrs. Patterson will not mind. She has been encouraging me to get out and see more of the area." They walked back into town hand in hand, drawing curious looks from the townspeople but not caring. Something had shifted between them, something deep and real. They both felt it, this certainty that their lives had just changed in the most wonderful way possible. Preston left Alta that afternoon with a lighter heart than he had felt in years. The ranch work that had seemed so burdensome before now felt purposeful. He was not just working for himself anymore. He was working for a future that might include Rebecca, and that made all the difference. Sunday morning, he woke early and cleaned the small ranch house from top to bottom. It was a modest structure, just 3 rooms with simple furnishings, but it was sturdy and well built. His father had constructed it with his own hands, and Preston had maintained it carefully over the years. He wanted Rebecca to see it at its best, to see the potential it held. He was waiting on the porch when she arrived in a wagon driven by Mrs. Patterson, who gave Preston a knowing wink as Rebecca climbed down. The older woman had clearly heard about their growing attachment and approved. "Have her back by supper time," Mrs. Patterson called cheerfully as she turned the wagon around. "And Preston Ellis, you behave yourself like the gentleman I know you to be." Preston felt his face heat up, but he nodded respectfully. "Yes, madam, I will." Rebecca was laughing as she walked up to the porch, her eyes bright with amusement. She wore a simple calico dress in pale yellow, and she had woven wildflowers into her braid. She looked beautiful and happy, and Preston felt his heart swell at the sight of her. "Welcome to my ranch," he said, suddenly nervous. "It is not much, but it is home." Rebecca looked around, taking in the house, the barn, the corrals, and the land stretching out in every direction. Her expression was thoughtful, considering. Preston held his breath, waiting for her verdict. "It is wonderful," she finally said, and the sincerity in her voice made Preston relax. "I can see how much potential it has. The land is beautiful and the house looks solid and well cared for. You have built something good here, Preston." "My father built it," Preston said. "I am just trying to keep his dream alive. Some days it feels like I am barely holding on, but other days I can see what it could become. More cattle, better grazing, maybe even some horses. There is so much possibility." Rebecca walked closer, her hand finding his. "And you will achieve it. I can tell you are the kind of man who does not give up." Preston showed her around the property, introducing her to his small herd of cattle and his horse Dusty. Rebecca was not shy about the animals, approaching them confidently and speaking to them in a soft, soothing voice. Dusty, who was usually standoffish with strangers, nuzzled Rebecca's hand almost immediately. "She likes you," Preston said, surprised and pleased. "I like her too," Rebecca said, stroking the horse's nose. "We had horses back in Missouri. I have always loved them." They spent the afternoon talking and walking the property. Preston showed Rebecca the creek that ran through his land, a reliable source of water that made the ranch viable. They sat by the creek's edge, letting the peaceful sound of flowing water wash over them. "Tell me about your parents," Rebecca said softly. "You have mentioned your father's dream, but I want to know more about them." Preston was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "My father was a hard man, but fair. He came west looking for opportunity and found this land. He saw what it could be, worked himself nearly to death building this ranch. My mother was softer, kinder. She balanced him out. They both died 5 years ago during a harsh winter. Illness took them within days of each other. "I am so sorry," Rebecca said, her hand on his arm. "It is a terrible thing to lose your parents." "You know something about that," Preston said gently. Rebecca nodded, her eyes distant. "My parents died last winter from influenza. It swept through our town, taking so many. I was working as a seamstress, living with them and helping however I could. When they were gone, the house felt too empty, too full of ghosts. My aunt wrote and invited me to come to California to start fresh. I thought it was what I needed, but now I am not so sure it was California I needed. Maybe I just needed a new beginning, and that can happen anywhere." "It can happen here," Preston said, his voice low and intense. "If you want it to, Rebecca. I know it is fast, I know we have only known each other a week, but I have never been more certain of anything. I want you here. I want to build this ranch with you, to build a life with you." Rebecca turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "You really mean that?" "I do," Preston said. "I have been alone for 5 years, telling myself I did not need anyone, that work was enough. But then you came into my life and suddenly everything changed. Suddenly I can see a future that includes more than just survival. I can see happiness, partnership, love. I can see all of that with you." "Preston," Rebecca whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I feel the same way. It terrifies me how much I feel for you already, how much I want this future you are describing. But I do want it. I want to be here with you to help you build this dream." Preston pulled her close, kissing her with all the passion and hope he felt. Rebecca responded in kind, her arms tight around him. They held each other by the creek, the California sun warm on their backs, and made silent promises to each other that they both intended to keep. When they finally returned to the house, the afternoon was growing late. Preston fixed them a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried fruit, apologizing for the sparse offering. "I am not much of a cook," he admitted. "I mostly just eat whatever is easiest." "Then it is a good thing I know how to cook," Rebecca said with a smile. "If I am going to be here, you are going to eat proper meals." The casual way she said, "If I am going to be here," as if it were already decided, made Preston's heart soar. They ate together at the small wooden table, and Preston could easily imagine this becoming their daily routine. Coming in from work to find Rebecca here, sharing meals and conversation, building a life together piece by piece. When it was time to take Rebecca back to town, Preston felt reluctant to let her go. They stood on the porch, holding hands and talking about everything they needed to discuss. How fast were they moving? What would people think? What were the practical considerations? "I need to establish myself here first," Rebecca said practically. "Get a job, prove I can support myself. I do not want anyone thinking I am just latching onto you out of desperation." "No one would think that," Preston protested. "Maybe not, but I would know," Rebecca said firmly. "I need to do this right, Preston. I need to build my own life here first, and then we can build one together. Does that make sense?" Preston understood, even though it meant waiting. "How long?" "Give me a few months," Rebecca said. "Let me work for the dressmaker, save some money, become part of the community. Court me properly, Preston Ellis. Take me to church socials and town gatherings. Let people see us together and get used to the idea. Then when we decide to marry, it will feel right to everyone, including us." "When we decide to marry," Preston repeated, loving how certain she sounded. "Not if, but when." "When," Rebecca confirmed with a smile. "I am quite certain about that part. I just want to do everything else the right way." Preston hitched up Dusty to his small wagon and drove Rebecca back to town as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. They talked the whole way, planning and dreaming. Preston would come to town twice a week now, not just once. Rebecca would visit the ranch on Sundays. They would take things slow but steady, building their relationship on a foundation of friendship and respect as well as attraction. In town, Preston walked Rebecca to the boarding house door. Mrs. Patterson was visible through the window, tactfully pretending not to watch them. "Thank you for today," Rebecca said. "It was perfect." "Thank you for coming," Preston replied, "for giving us a chance." "I am not giving us a chance," Rebecca said with a soft laugh. "I am diving in head first. I am just trying to be smart about how I do it." Preston kissed her goodnight, a lingering kiss full of promise. "I will see you Wednesday," he said, "and every Wednesday and Saturday after that. I will be waiting," Rebecca promised. The next few months unfolded with a sweetness that surprised them both. Rebecca did indeed get a job with the dressmaker, a stern but fair woman named Agnes Miller who recognized skill when she saw it. Rebecca's needlework was excellent, and soon she was taking on more complex projects, earning respect and a steady income. Preston continued working his ranch, but with a new energy and purpose. He made improvements he had been putting off, fixed fences more carefully, and even managed to acquire 3 more head of cattle. The ranch began to look more prosperous, more like the dream his father had envisioned. Every Wednesday and Saturday, Preston came to town. He and Rebecca would walk together, attend church services, and participate in community events. The people of Alta watched their courtship with approval. Preston had always been respected, and Rebecca had quickly won hearts with her kindness and work ethic. They made a good match, everyone agreed. They learned each other's quirks and habits. Preston discovered that Rebecca sang while she worked, that she had a terrible sense of direction but an excellent memory for details, that she was afraid of thunderstorms but faced her fear with quiet courage. Rebecca learned that Preston talked to his animals as if they could understand every word, that he had a dry sense of humor that could make her laugh until her sides hurt, that he pushed himself too hard and needed reminding to rest. They also learned how to navigate disagreements. The first real argument came in September, when Preston mentioned he was considering selling some of his cattle to a buyer offering a price that Rebecca thought was too low. "You are worth more than that," she insisted as they sat on the porch of the ranch house one Sunday afternoon. "Your cattle are healthy and well cared for. You should hold out for a better price." "I need the money now," Preston argued, frustrated. "There are repairs that cannot wait and winter is coming." "Then take a loan from the bank," Rebecca suggested. "I do not want debt," Preston said stubbornly. "My father always said debt was a trap." "And my father always said you should know your worth and not sell yourself short," Rebecca countered. "Pride is well and good, Preston, but practical sense is better." They went back and forth, voices rising until finally Preston stood up and walked away, too frustrated to continue. Rebecca let him go, understanding he needed space. She waited on the porch, and 20 minutes later Preston returned, his anger cooled. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "I should not have walked away like that." "I am sorry too," Rebecca said. "I should not have pushed so hard. It is your ranch, your decision." Preston sat down beside her, taking her hand. "But you were right. I was selling short because I was scared and impatient. I can wait for a better price. And maybe a small loan would not be the end of the world. We do not have to agree on everything," Rebecca said gently, "but we do have to listen to each other." "I know," Preston said. "I have been on my own so long, making all my own decisions. It is strange having someone else's opinion to consider." "Good strange," he added quickly. "But strange." They talked it through, finding a compromise. Preston would hold out for a better price on the cattle but would also approach the bank about a small loan to cover the most urgent repairs. It was not what either of them had initially wanted, but it was a solution they could both live with. The argument taught them both something important. They could disagree and still love each other, could work through problems instead of letting them fester. It made their relationship stronger, built on communication and mutual respect. As autumn arrived, turning the California hills golden and bringing cooler nights, Preston and Rebecca's relationship deepened. They no longer talked about if they would marry, but rather when and how. The question was becoming not whether they would spend their lives together, but when they would make it official. One October evening, as they sat by the creek on Preston's property watching the sunset, Preston pulled a small box from his pocket. His hands shook slightly as he opened it to reveal a simple gold ring with a small, clear stone. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "The only thing of value she owned. My father gave it to her when they married, and she wore it every day of her life. I have been carrying it around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the ring, then at Preston's earnest face. "Rebecca Langley," Preston said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I know we have not known each other long. Only a few months, really. But I have never been more certain of anything than I am of this. You are my best friend, my partner, the person I want beside me for every day of the rest of my life. You make me better. You make me happier than I knew I could be. Will you marry me? Will you make this ranch our ranch, this life our life?" Rebecca was crying openly now, but she was smiling too, her face radiant with joy. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Preston, I will marry you. I love you so much." Preston slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, pouring all his love and hope and promise into that kiss. Rebecca held him just as tightly, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "I love you too," Preston whispered against her hair. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you. I think I was just waiting for you to stumble into my life." "And I stumbled in at exactly the right time," Rebecca said with a tearful laugh. "Your kindness saved me, Preston, in more ways than one. You did not just give me money that day. You gave me hope when I had none. You showed me that there were still good people in the world that I could trust again, that I could love again." They stayed by the creek as the stars came out, making plans and dreaming dreams. They decided to marry in November, giving them time to prepare but not waiting so long that it felt like torture. It would be a simple ceremony at the church in Alta, with the whole town invited. Rebecca would move into the ranch house, and together they would continue building the life they both wanted. The next weeks were a flurry of activity. Rebecca finished several large sewing projects to build up her savings. Preston worked on fixing up the house, making repairs and improvements to prepare for his bride. The townspeople rallied around them, offering help and support. Mrs. Patterson insisted on hosting a small engagement party at the boarding house. Reverend Taylor agreed to perform the ceremony. Agnes Miller gave Rebecca time off to prepare her wedding dress. Rebecca made her dress herself, working late into the night by lamplight. It was a simple design in ivory cotton with delicate embroidery on the bodice, practical but beautiful. She imagined Preston's face when he saw her in it, and the thought made her work with even greater care. Preston used some of his loan money to buy paint for the house, freshening up the exterior and interior. He also bought a new bed frame, wanting their marriage to start with something new and special. The old furniture had served him well, but he wanted Rebecca to have nice things, to feel that this was her home as much as his. On a crisp November morning, they were married in Alta's small church. Rebecca wore her handmade dress and carried wildflowers picked fresh that morning. Preston wore his best suit, brushed clean and pressed. His hands shook as Rebecca walked down the aisle toward him, and tears streamed down his face when she reached his side. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he whispered, and Rebecca squeezed his hand, her own eyes bright with happy tears. Reverend Taylor performed the ceremony with warmth and humor, speaking about love and partnership and the journey they were beginning together. When it came time for vows, Preston and Rebecca faced each other, hands clasped, and spoke from their hearts. "Rebecca," Preston said, his voice strong and clear, "I vow to love you every day of my life. I vow to work beside you, to support you, to honor you. I vow to be faithful and true, to make you laugh when I can and hold you when you need comfort. I vow to build a life with you that would make both our parents proud. You are my heart, and I am yours from this day forward." Rebecca's voice was equally steady as she made her vows. "Preston, I vow to love you with everything I have. I vow to be your partner in all things, to work beside you and dream with you. I vow to honor the kindness you showed me, to never forget that you gave me your last dollar when you owed me nothing. That kindness changed my life, and I vow to spend the rest of my days showing you that your faith in me was not misplaced. I love you, and I choose you, today and always." There was not a dry eye in the church as they exchanged rings and sealed their vows with a kiss. The congregation erupted in applause and cheers as Reverend Taylor pronounced them husband and wife. The reception was held at the church hall, with food and music and dancing. Preston, who claimed he could not dance, surprised Rebecca by sweeping her around the floor with reasonable competence. They laughed and celebrated with their community, feeling surrounded by love and support. As evening approached, they climbed into Preston's wagon, now decorated with ribbons and flowers by well-meaning friends, and headed toward their ranch, their home, their future. The house glowed with lamplight as they approached. Preston had left lamps burning before the ceremony, wanting Rebecca to come home to warmth and light. He helped her down from the wagon and then, without warning, swept her into his arms. "What are you doing?" Rebecca laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Carrying my bride across the threshold," Preston said, grinning. "It is tradition." He carried her into the house and set her down gently in the main room. Rebecca looked around, seeing the space with new eyes. This was her home now, their home. The thought filled her with warmth and belonging. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ellis," Preston said softly, and Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes at the sound of her new name. "Mrs. Ellis," she repeated, testing it out. "I like the sound of that." That night, they lay together in their new bed, wrapped in each other's arms, and talked about the future. They wanted children, they both agreed, wanted to fill the house with laughter and life. They wanted to grow the ranch to make it prosperous. They wanted to grow old together, working side by side through whatever challenges came their way. "I cannot believe this is real," Rebecca whispered in the darkness. "6 months ago, I was stumbling into town, certain I was going to die. And now I am here, married to the best man I have ever known, with a home and a future and hope. It feels like a dream." "It is real," Preston assured her, pulling her closer. "You are real, I am real, this is real. We are building something beautiful together, Rebecca, something that will last." "Because of your kindness," Rebecca said, "because you saw someone in need and helped, even when you could barely help yourself. That dollar you gave me was worth more than gold. It was worth everything." Preston kissed her forehead tenderly. "You are worth everything," he said. "And I will spend every day proving that to you." The first months of their marriage were an adjustment, learning to live together and share space. Rebecca brought order to the household, establishing routines for cooking and cleaning that made the house feel more like a home. Preston appreciated coming in from work to find meals prepared and the house tidy, but more than that, he appreciated having someone to talk to share his day with. They worked together on the ranch when Rebecca's time allowed. She proved to be capable and hardworking, unafraid of dirt or sweat. She learned to help with feeding the animals, mending fences, and even assisting with difficult calvings. Preston taught her to ride better, and soon she could handle a horse with confidence. In return, Rebecca taught Preston about managing money more carefully, about planning ahead instead of just reacting to problems. She took over the ranch's accounts, tracking expenses and income with a careful eye. Under her management, they began to see exactly where money was going and where they could cut back or invest more wisely. Winter came, bringing cold rains and short days. But the ranch house stayed warm and cozy, and Preston and Rebecca found joy in the quiet evenings spent together. They read aloud to each other, played cards, and talked for hours about everything and nothing. They learned each other's rhythms and patterns, becoming attuned to moods and needs. One evening in January, as they sat by the fire, Rebecca placed Preston's hand on her stomach and gave him a meaningful look. Understanding dawned on his face, followed by pure joy. "Really?" he breathed, his eyes wide. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," Rebecca said, smiling at his reaction. "I have suspected for a few weeks, but I wanted to be certain before I told you. We are going to have a baby, Preston." Preston let out a whoop of joy and pulled Rebecca into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We are having a baby," he kept repeating as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." "In late summer, I think," Rebecca said when he finally set her down. "August, maybe early September." Preston cupped her face in his hands, looking at her with such love and wonder that Rebecca felt tears spring to her eyes. "You have given me everything," he said quietly. "A home, a purpose, love, and now a family. I did not know I could be this happy." "You gave me everything first," Rebecca reminded him. "You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me a future when I thought I had lost mine. This baby, this life we are building, it all started with your kindness." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Rebecca continued working at the dressmaker's shop until her growing belly made it impractical. Then she worked from home, taking on sewing projects she could do while sitting. Preston became almost comically overprotective, insisting she rest more and trying to do all the heavy work himself. "I am pregnant, not broken," Rebecca would laugh when he tried to stop her from lifting anything heavier than a teacup. "I know, but I worry," Preston would reply, and Rebecca's heart would melt at the concern in his eyes. As her due date approached, Preston became increasingly nervous. What if something went wrong? What if he could not protect her and the baby? Rebecca calmed his fears with patience and logic, reminding him that women had been having babies since the dawn of time and that she was healthy and strong. When labor began on a warm August afternoon, Preston immediately rode to town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Sarah Fletcher who had delivered half the babies in Alta. She came quickly, bringing her supplies and a calm, reassuring presence. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Preston paced outside the bedroom, feeling helpless and terrified. Every sound from the room made his heart jump. He prayed more fervently than he ever had in his life, begging God to keep Rebecca and the baby safe. Finally, in the early afternoon, he heard the thin, wavering cry of a newborn. His heart stopped, then started again double time. A moment later, Sarah opened the door, smiling. "You have a son," she announced, "and your wife is tired but well. Come meet your boy." Preston entered the room on shaking legs. Rebecca lay in bed, pale and exhausted but smiling, holding a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up as Preston approached, and the love in her eyes made his breath catch. "Come meet your son," she said softly, echoing Sarah's words. Preston sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused eyes. He had a shock of dark hair and a little rosebud mouth. Preston felt his heart expand in his chest, felt love so intense it was almost painful. "He is perfect," Preston whispered, reaching out to touch one tiny fist. The baby's hand wrapped around his finger, gripping with surprising strength. "You are perfect. What should we name him?" Rebecca asked, watching Preston's face with tender amusement. Preston had been thinking about names for months, but now all those carefully considered options fled his mind. He looked at his son, at his wife, at the life they had built together, and one name rose above all others. "Thomas," he said, "after your father, Thomas Ellis." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure? We could name him after your father." "No," Preston said firmly. "Your father's memory deserves to live on, and our son will carry it forward. Thomas Langley Ellis." "Thomas Langley Ellis," Rebecca repeated, trying it out. "Tommy, I love it." Over the next weeks, Preston discovered that love could grow even deeper. Watching Rebecca with their son, seeing her nurse him and sing to him and care for him with such gentle devotion, made Preston love her even more than he thought possible. And Thomas himself was a source of constant wonder. Every tiny yawn, every small noise, every moment of contact filled Preston with awe. He became adept at changing diapers and soothing cries, though he always deferred to Rebecca's greater knowledge. He would walk Thomas around the house at night when the baby was fussy, talking to him about the ranch and the cattle and all the things they would do together when Thomas was older. "You are going to be a great father," Rebecca told him one evening as she watched him rock their son to sleep. "I hope so," Preston said. "I want to give him everything. A good home, a good life, security. I want him to never know what it feels like to struggle the way we did." "He will know he is loved," Rebecca said. "That is the most important thing." As Thomas grew from a newborn to an infant, the ranch continued to prosper. Preston's patient waiting for better cattle prices paid off, and he was able to sell at a profit that allowed them to pay off the loan and invest in more stock. Rebecca's sewing work brought in additional income. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable and secure. Thomas proved to be a happy baby, quick to smile and laugh. By his first birthday, he was toddling around the house, getting into everything with curious determination. Preston built him a small rocking horse, and Thomas would spend hours riding it, making horse sounds and pretending to gallop across the prairie. "He is going to be a cowboy, just like his father," Rebecca said with amusement as she watched Thomas on his toy horse. "If that is what he wants," Preston said, "but he can be anything. A lawyer, a doctor, a shopkeeper, anything he dreams of." "He will be whatever he is meant to be," Rebecca said wisely, "and we will support him no matter what." When Thomas was 2 years old, Rebecca became pregnant again. This time Preston was less nervous, more confident. He knew what to expect and trusted that Rebecca would come through safely, as she had before. Their daughter was born on a spring morning in 1887, arriving much faster than Thomas had. She came into the world with a lusty cry that made everyone laugh. She had Rebecca's honey-colored hair and green eyes, and Preston fell in love with her immediately. "What shall we name her?" he asked, cradling his daughter with the confidence of experience. "I was thinking Margaret after your mother," Rebecca said. "Maggie for short." Preston looked down at his daughter, at her perfect little face, and felt emotion clog his throat. "Maggie," he said softly. "Yes, Margaret Rebecca Ellis, after both our mothers." Their family complete, Preston and Rebecca settled into a rhythm of life that felt right. The ranch continued to grow, and by the time Thomas was 5 and Maggie 3, they had tripled their herd and built a new, larger barn. They had hired a ranch hand named Miguel, a skilled cowboy who had drifted into Alta looking for work. He proved invaluable, allowing Preston to take on more ambitious projects. The children grew healthy and happy, raised with love and discipline in equal measure. Thomas was serious and responsible, always wanting to help his father with ranch work. Maggie was spirited and adventurous, keeping everyone on their toes with her antics. Together, they filled the house with noise and laughter and life. Preston and Rebecca's love for each other only deepened with time. They still talked every night after the children were in bed, sharing thoughts and dreams just as they had in their courting days. They still held hands when they walked, still kissed with passion and tenderness. The challenges of life had not diminished their love, but rather strengthened it. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston and Rebecca stood on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over their land. Thomas and Maggie were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. The ranch spread out before them, prosperous and beautiful, a testament to years of hard work and dedication. "You remember the day we met?" Rebecca asked, leaning into Preston's side. "Every detail," Preston said, wrapping his arm around her. "You looked like you were about to collapse. I thought you were the bravest, most beautiful thing I had ever seen." "You gave me your last dollar," Rebecca said, just as she had said so many times over the years. "Your kindness was worth more than gold. And you gave me everything in return," Preston said. "A home, a family, a life worth living. You are worth more than all the gold in California." Rebecca Ellis. Rebecca turned to face him, her eyes shining with love. "We built a good life together." "The best life," Preston agreed, "and it is not over yet. We have years ahead of us, years to watch our children grow, maybe to meet grandchildren someday, years to work this land and love each other. Years to prove that kindness and love can change everything," Rebecca added. "That is what you showed me, Preston. That one act of kindness can change a life, can change everything." Preston kissed her then, a long, sweet kiss that still held all the passion and promise of their early days. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "I love you," Preston said. "Today and always." "Today and always," Rebecca echoed. They stood together on their porch as the stars came out, their children playing nearby, their home warm and welcoming behind them, their future stretching out bright and full of possibility. They had started with nothing but hope and a single dollar, and they had built a life beyond anything either of them had imagined. Rebecca thought back to that desperate day when she had stumbled into Alta, certain she was going to die. She thought about Preston's kindness, his willingness to give everything to a stranger. That moment had changed both their lives, had set them on a path neither could have predicted but both were grateful for. Preston thought about that same day, about the decision to give away his last dollar. It had seemed like such a small thing at the time, just helping someone in need. He had not known that decision would bring him the greatest gift of his life, that the woman he helped would become his whole world. As they watched their children play, as they stood together in the golden light of sunset, they both knew that they had found something rare and precious. They had found love, true and deep and lasting. They had found partnership, working together to build something meaningful. They had found home, not just in a place but in each other. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their children's lives. Thomas grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as Preston did. At 20, he took over much of the day-to-day operations, working alongside Miguel and proving himself capable and fair. He courted a sweet young woman from town named Elizabeth, and Preston and Rebecca watched with joy as their son fell in love. Maggie, true to her spirited nature, surprised everyone by wanting to become a teacher. At 18, she moved to Sacramento to attend the normal school there, determined to get an education so she could return and teach the children of Alta. Preston and Rebecca missed her terribly, but supported her ambition, proud of her drive and intelligence. When Thomas married Elizabeth in 1895, the wedding was held at the ranch, under the big oak tree near the creek where Preston had proposed to Rebecca all those years ago. Rebecca cried happy tears as she watched her son make his vows, seeing so much of Preston in him. The young couple built a small house on the ranch property, and Elizabeth fit into their family as if she had always been there. The first grandchild arrived in 1896, a baby girl named Rose. Preston held his granddaughter with wonder, marveling at how the cycle continued. He was 54 years old now, his hair graying and his face lined with years of sun and work, but holding Rose made him feel young again. "We are grandparents," Rebecca said, watching him with their granddaughter. "When did we get old enough to be grandparents? We are not old," Preston protested, though his back ached and his hands were stiff in the mornings. "We are seasoned." Rebecca laughed, still sounding as young as the day he met her. At 48, she was still beautiful to him, still the woman who had captured his heart with her strength and grace. Maggie returned from Sacramento in 1897, certified as a teacher and ready to open a school in Alta. The town had grown over the years and needed a proper schoolhouse. Maggie threw herself into the project with characteristic energy, rallying community support and even securing funding from the state. By fall, Alta had a beautiful new schoolhouse, and Maggie stood in front of her first class with pride and excitement. One evening, as Preston and Rebecca sat on their porch watching the sunset as they had done for 20 years, Rebecca took his hand and squeezed it gently. "We have lived a good life," she said softly. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "We have," Preston agreed. "Though I think it is far from over. We have years yet, you and I." "I hope so," Rebecca said. "I want to see all our grandchildren grow up. I want to see Thomas and Elizabeth build their own legacy here. I want to see Maggie inspire generations of children. I want to grow old with you, Preston Ellis, watching everything we built continue and flourish." "And we will," Preston said confidently. "We have survived everything life has thrown at us so far. We will survive whatever comes next as long as we are together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as Thomas and Elizabeth walked together near the barn, baby Rose in Elizabeth's arms. They could hear Maggie inside the house, preparing lessons for the next day. The ranch hummed with life and activity, with family and purpose. Preston thought about that moment, 20 years ago, when he had given Rebecca his last dollar. It had been an impulse, an act of simple kindness that he had not thought twice about. He could never have imagined where that moment would lead, how that one decision would shape the rest of his life. "Your kindness is worth more than gold," Rebecca said suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. "I told you that the first day we met, and I have never stopped believing it. Your kindness changed my life, Preston. It gave me everything." "You changed my life too," Preston said. "You took a lonely cowboy with a struggling ranch and gave him a reason to hope, to dream, to work toward something better. You are my everything, Rebecca." As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared, they remained on their porch, surrounded by the life they had built together. It was not a life of wealth or fame. They had not become rich or powerful, but they had something far more valuable. They had love, family, and the deep satisfaction of knowing they had built something good and lasting. More years passed, bringing more grandchildren and more joy. Thomas and Elizabeth had 3 more children, each one adding to the lively chaos of family gatherings. Maggie eventually married a kind man named Daniel, who had come to Alta to work at the mine, and stayed for the teacher who had stolen his heart. They had 2 children and lived in town, close to the schoolhouse. Preston and Rebecca slowed down as age caught up with them, but they remained active and engaged. Preston still rode out to check on the cattle, though Thomas did most of the heavy work now. Rebecca still sewed, her fingers still nimble despite arthritis that made them ache. They still held hands on the porch each evening, still talked and laughed and loved each other with the same intensity they had felt as newlyweds. On their 30th anniversary in 1914, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Grandchildren ran everywhere, their shouts and laughter filling the air. Thomas had taken over as the primary rancher, with Preston now in an advisory role. The ranch was more successful than it had ever been, a true legacy that would pass down through generations. During the celebration, Thomas stood up to make a toast. He raised his glass and looked at his parents with obvious love and respect. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered family. "They started with nothing but faith and hard work, and they built all of this. They taught us the value of kindness, of perseverance, of love. They showed us that the most important things in life are not things at all, but the people we share our lives with." To Preston and Rebecca Ellis, the best parents and grandparents anyone could ask for. Everyone raised their glasses and cheered. Preston and Rebecca stood, accepting hugs and well wishes from their children and grandchildren. As the celebration continued around them, they found a quiet moment to slip away to their favorite spot by the creek. 30 years, Rebecca marveled, sitting on the creek bank where they had shared so many important moments. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you gave me that dollar and changed my life. Sometimes it feels like I have always known you," Preston said, sitting beside her with a slight groan. His knees were not what they used to be. "Like there was never a time before you." "There was barely any time before you for me," Rebecca said. "I was 20 when we met, barely more than a girl. You taught me what it meant to be loved, to be cherished, to be a partner rather than just a helper. You taught me what true kindness looks like." Preston took her hand, running his thumb over her wedding ring. It was worn now, the metal thin from 30 years of wear, but it was still the same ring his mother had worn, still precious beyond measure. "I gave you $1, he said. "And you gave me the world." "We gave each other the world," Rebecca corrected gently. "That is what love does. It multiplies everything, makes everything better and more meaningful." They sat by the creek as the sun set, just as they had done thousands of times before. They could hear their family in the distance, celebrating and laughing. They could see their ranch, their home, their legacy spread out around them. They had built something that would outlast them, something that would continue for generations. Preston pulled Rebecca close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. They watched the water flow past, constant and eternal, and thought about the flow of time, the way moments became memories, the way a single act of kindness could ripple outward and change everything. "You have any regrets?" Rebecca asked softly. "Not a single one," Preston said immediately. "Every choice I made led me to you, led me to this life. How could I regret any of it?" "I do not either," Rebecca said. "Even the hard parts, even the struggles, they all had purpose. They all brought us here." As darkness fell and the stars came out, they made their way back to the house, walking slowly, supporting each other. Inside, their family waited with cake and music and more celebration. But for a moment, they paused on the porch, looking at each other in the lamplight spilling from the windows. "I love you," Preston said, the words as true and powerful as the first time he had spoken them. "Today and always." "Today and always," Rebecca replied, and they kissed, a tender kiss full of 3 decades of love and devotion. They rejoined their family, surrounded by the noise and warmth of those they loved most. And as the evening wore on, as grandchildren climbed into their laps, and children shared stories and laughter filled every corner of the house. Preston and Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that they had succeeded in the most important endeavor of all. They had loved well and been loved in return. They had built a family, a home, a life. They had proven that kindness and faith and hope could overcome any obstacle. They had shown that love, real and deep and true, could last a lifetime and beyond. Years continued to unfold. The world changed around them. California grew and modernized. Alta remained small but prosperous, its character shaped in part by the Ellis family's continued presence and contribution. The ranch thrived under Thomas's management, expanding and adapting to new times. Preston celebrated his 80th birthday in 1922, surrounded by more family than he could have ever imagined. His children were all successful and happy. His grandchildren were growing into fine young people. There were even a few great-grandchildren toddling around. He looked at the crowd gathered in his honor and felt overwhelming gratitude for the life he had been given. Rebecca, now 75, sat beside him throughout the celebration, her hand in his. They had been married for 38 years, together for nearly 4 decades. They had weathered illness and setbacks, loss and disappointment, but through it all, their love had remained constant, a foundation that never cracked. That evening, after everyone had gone home, they sat on their porch one last time. Preston was tired, more tired than he could remember being. But he was content, deeply and truly content. "We did it," he said to Rebecca. "We built something beautiful." "We did," Rebecca agreed, her eyes misty. "And it will go on long after we are gone. Our children, our grandchildren, the ranch, the life we created, it will all continue." "That is legacy," Preston said. "Not money or land, but the love we shared and the family we built. That is what lasts." They sat together as the stars came out, holding hands as they had done for nearly 40 years. The night was peaceful, the air sweet with the scent of wildflowers. Preston felt at peace, his life complete and full. Preston Ellis passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 days later, with Rebecca beside him. He went gently, without pain, his last sight Rebecca's beloved face. She held him as he took his final breath, telling him she loved him, that she would see him again someday. The funeral was held under the oak tree where Thomas and Elizabeth had married, where so many important family moments had taken place. The whole town came to pay respects to a man who had been respected and loved by all who knew him. Thomas spoke of his father's integrity and work ethic. Maggie spoke of his gentleness and wisdom. But it was Rebecca who spoke the words that captured the essence of Preston Ellis. "He was a kind man," she said simply, her voice steady despite her grief. "In a world that often rewarded cruelty and selfishness, Preston Ellis chose kindness. He gave me his last dollar when he owed me nothing, and that act of simple generosity changed both our lives. He showed me that goodness still existed, that there were still people who would help a stranger without expecting anything in return. He was my husband, my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life. And his kindness was worth more than all the gold in the world." Rebecca lived for 5 more years after Preston's death. She remained active and engaged, spending time with her children and grandchildren, continuing to sow and garden and participate in community life. But everyone could see that a light had gone out for her. She missed Preston with an ache that never fully faded. She often sat on the porch at sunset, the way she and Preston had done for so many years. She would talk to him sometimes, telling him about the family, about the ranch, about all the small details of life he was missing. She felt his presence around her, felt certain that he was still somehow there, watching over her and waiting for her. On a warm evening in June of 1927, Rebecca sat on the porch watching the sunset. Thomas and Elizabeth were in the house preparing dinner, and several grandchildren were playing in the yard. She felt tired, a deep weariness that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. She was 80 years old, and she had lived a full, rich life. But she was ready to rest, ready to be with Preston again. As the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Rebecca closed her eyes. She thought of Preston, of that first day when he had given her his last dollar and looked at her with such kindness. She thought of their wedding day, of the birth of their children, of 1,000 quiet moments shared on this very porch. She thought of his smile, his laugh, the way he said her name. "I am coming, my love," she whispered, and she felt a peace settle over her like a warm blanket. Thomas found her an hour later, sitting peacefully in her rocking chair, a slight smile on her face. She had gone to join Preston, slipping away as gently as he had, ready to continue their story in whatever came next. They buried Rebecca beside Preston under the oak tree, their graves marked by simple headstones that bore their names and the years of their lives. But their real monument was all around, in the thriving ranch, in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy of love and kindness they had created. Years passed, then decades. The 20th century unfolded with all its changes and challenges. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through generations. The story of Preston and Rebecca became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. Children grew up hearing about the cowboy who gave away his last dollar, and the woman who said his kindness was worth more than gold. The oak tree where they were buried grew massive and strong, its branches spreading wide, providing shade and shelter. Family gatherings were still held there, celebrations and remembrances. And visitors to the ranch, whether family or friends, would often pause by the two simple graves, reflecting on the love story that had started with a single act of kindness and had lasted a lifetime. The Ellis Ranch continued to thrive into the modern era, adapting to new times while maintaining the values Preston and Rebecca had established. Hard work, integrity, kindness, and family remained the cornerstones of everything they did. And whenever decisions needed to be made, whenever challenges arose, someone would inevitably ask, what would Preston and Rebecca do? Because their story was not just about love, though it was a great love story. It was about the power of kindness, about how one small act of generosity could change lives, create family, and build legacy. It was about choosing to help when you had little to give, about seeing worth in strangers, about believing in the goodness of humanity, even when life gave you reasons to doubt. Preston Ellis had given Rebecca Langley his last dollar on a hot July day in 1883, not knowing that this simple act would become the foundation of a love that would span decades, create a family that would span generations, and leave a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And Rebecca had been right all those years ago when she looked at a struggling cowboy and told him his kindness was worth more than gold. It was worth more than gold. It was worth everything. It was worth a lifetime of love, a house full of children, a ranch that prospered, and a story that would be told for generations to come. Their love story ended where all love stories must, with death and parting. But in another sense, it never ended at all. It lived on in every descendant who chose kindness over cruelty, generosity over selfishness. It lived on in the ranch that still bore their name. It lived on in the memories and stories shared at family gatherings. It lived on in the values they had instilled and the example they had set. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun sets over the California hills, those who visit the ranch swear they can see two figures sitting on the old porch, holding hands and watching the stars come out, together still in the place they had loved, in the home they had built, surrounded by the legacy of their enduring love. The end.